Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our last panel/workshop of this very enlightening discussion. I like to see it as an extended discussion. Today, we have many issues to consider and many issues that affect our lives and the lives of people of color all over the world today. This means that when it comes on to activism, activism isn't just something that is in the past. Activism is something that we all should be participating in. It's a part of our present. And we're honored here today to have with us three activists. We have Nadine Spence, we have Omar Ryan, and we have Ajamo Nangwaya. Dr. Nangwaya sees himself as an organizer. In fact, I could tell you about Dr. Nangwaya without even reading his bio. He's my colleague at the Institute of Caribbean Studies. One of Dr. Nangwaya's passions in life is, of course, ensuring that as individuals, we all stand up for our rights, that we all affect change, that we go to places that make us uncomfortable. And if this means that you go into the inner city communities to change the lives of the people there, to touch their lives, then you do it. Dr. Nangwaya's research interests include Rastafari liberty, economic and social development, labor self-management, cooperatives, prefigurative politics, gender, development and social justice, culture, and social emancipation. He's written several books, several articles, and co-authored several others as well. With Dr. Michael Trusello, he published the anthology, Why Don't the Poor Rise Up? Organizing the 21st Century Resistance. He's also co-editor with Kali Ukunu of the publication Jackson Rising, The Struggle for Economic Democracy and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. But he's not just a scholar. As I said, he's an agitator. He lives what he preaches. So he's involved in trade unions. He's a cooperative educator. He founded the conference of the United States Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and he was elected to its board of directors. He's vice president of Coupe Ontario. And he served 6 years as an executive member of the trade union of the local Coupe 3907. So that is Dr. Nangwaya. Now, Omar Ryan, I'm honored to say, is a past student of mine. Yes. Several centuries ago, right? No, he's also known as Melanin. He's the bearer of many hats, a proud son of St. Thomas. He's the father of a beautiful girl, Nala Ryan. He's an educator at Harvest Hill Christian Preparatory School and the Phillips Institute, both of which are located in St. Thomas. What makes Ryan so unique is that whereas many individuals leave St. Thomas to find their way, he decided to stay in St. Thomas to transform the lives of the people of St. Thomas. Last year, he was on TV, or was it early this year? But what he was trying to achieve were good roads for the people of St. Thomas. He's an author of a self-published anthology of poetry called Have to Get the Money. It's a mixture of inspirational, romantic, and social commentary poems. He's aiming to publish another by December entitled 10 Ways to Be Consistently Happy. He's an ambitious person. He's aspiring to be a lawyer, and he's an entrepreneur. He's founded a vegan food company. He's known for his outreach with young people from economically disadvantaged communities. And as I indicated before, he's a passionate advocate for the development of St. Thomas. He has done quite a bit of outreach work in his capacity as of student leader. He studied at UWI. As I said, he was one of my students. And he has gone on to ensure that he has touched the lives of many, many individuals, many young people. Literacy is one of his passions. Now, finally, I want to introduce you to Nadine Spence. Ms. Spence is very much in charge of the runnings of Mary C. Cole. In her capacity there, she's developed gender awareness, not just with the young women on C. Cole, but also with the young men on Chancellor Hall. In fact, through her activism, I would like to think that Chancellor is a better place for people like me to walk through. There was a time when I did not. She's very involved in many activities outside of the university. She's, well, we always see her in the media. She's on the television. And in that capacity, she's passionate about any issue that relates to inequality for women. She's a PhD candidate at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, and she's making great waves. I look forward to what she'll achieve next. So, welcome our panelists today. Ms. Nadine Spence, Dr. Nangwaya, Mr. Omar Ryan. Okay, we'll take you in order, Mr. Ryan. You're the first speaker, followed by Ms. Spence, and finally, Dr. Nangwaya. Each speaker, 15 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, it's good to be here. When you have a presentation or a research paper, there are limitations, and I must underscore those limitations before going to my 15 minutes presentation. As you would have heard, I'm now an educator, so I teach at 2 schools, and so I really started to write this paper this morning, 9 o'clock. So I haven't done much investigation into my topic really, but based from my prior knowledge and readings and a fast research on the internet, I found some stuff. And my presentation is about activism and protest in Jamaica, a model to enhancing discussion and human rights in a post-slave society. I would have really liked to have written more, but I think I've written some good amount for this 15 minutes presentation. Here we go. Jamaica is a very famous country situated in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. And since the days of colonialism by the Spanish and the British, there were protest and activism. Protest, activism, and resistance by the African peoples enslaved in the most criminal system known to modern human history, chattel slavery. As a group, the Maroons, led by the Right Excellent Nanny of the Maroons and their brothers, embodied the spirit of resistance and the activism from the earliest of times, leading to treaties and agreements in the 1700s, recognizing their right to freedom, land, and live as they chose to among themselves. In the 1800s, we saw the manifestation of protest in the 1831 Christmas Rebellion, led by the Right Excellent Sam Sharp, against the blood-draining slave system and the subsequent speedy emancipation of the enslaved people thereafter in 1838. Also, in 1865, the most significant protest in the history of Jamaica, led by the Right Excellent Paul Bogle, the Morant Bay War of October 1865, which resulted in a recorded 437 dead Africans, hundreds of burnt homes, floggings, and among other savagery by the then Governor Erie. However, colonialists examined the system and made many changes in Jamaica and the colonial world thereafter. One of those changes was a change from the old representative system to the crown colony system, and they instituted Governor Anthony Musgrave, which caused a lot of institutional changes thereafter. The island also witnessed an upsurge in protests in 1938, labor riots, which incidentally also started in St. Thomas on the Surge Island estate on the 5th of January and flared up across the entire Jamaica, and I reference Professor Horace Campbell is there in his book, Rasta and Resistance, from Marcus to Walter Rodney. This protest launched because, well, before I get into that, when you read about the protest of 1838, it will really give you to the docks from Sugar Estate or to the docks. But according to Professor Horace Campbell's book, Rasta and Resistance, it really started in St. Thomas on the 5th of January. This protest launched the political careers of the Right Excellent Norman Manley and the Right Excellent Alexander Bustamante. Earlier in the decade in 1930, the Honorable Lion of a Man, Leonard Howell, incidentally started Rastafari in St. Thomas, now a truly global cultural force laced with protest from the earliest beginnings. Jamaicans can be seen protesting every day against some form of injustice or discomfort. Protesters range from civil servants, workers, and community folk, in particular poor people, protesting police killings, poor road conditions, no electricity, flooding, fire, and neglect by authorities to provide representation and support. Activism and protest is a natural part of the spirit of Jamaican people. My intention here today is to look at activism and protest since 1968, which have shaped the society to be more responsive and aware of human rights. Since the 1968 Rodney student riots, where students of the UWI Mona campus launched in activism against the policy of the then government to ban Guyanese lecturer, Dr. Walter Rodney, a then lecturer at the Said University, activism has taken many roads. Activism in Jamaica have resulted in many riots and protests since then. Some of the most notable ones are the 1979 gas riots by the National Patriotic Movement against the Michael Manley-led PNP administration, the 1985 gas riots against the Edward Seaga-led JLP administration, the 2004 US students' protest against deregistration, the 1999 gas riots against the P.J. Patterson-led PNP administration, and the 2017 St. Thomas protest for better roads. From the above-mentioned protest against high fuel prices, a rollback in fuel prices was always the response by the authorities, which indicated the effectiveness of activism. The student protest against deregistration resulted in the then UWI administration rolling back deregistering students, and a $30 million revolving loan was established to assist students. From the St. Thomas protest, conversations were had in many quarters about the need for roads in St. Thomas, with the government coming out and making timelines for road developments in the parish. Hence, we have seen that authorities listen and act when people resort to activism, in particular violent forms of activism and protests such as refraining from going to work and operating public transport, actions that can cripple production. Activism in Jamaica is far more today, activism in Jamaica is far more diverse and are organized on many fronts. Activism is mostly evident through the many labor-related organizations, trade unions, and professional bodies such as the Nursing Association of Jamaica and the Police Federation. There is also the Jamaicans for Justice and Jamaica Forum for Lesbians, Allsexuals, and Gays, among other registered organizations campaigning through letter writing and engaging in conversation, research, and policy development that can lead to the recognition of their lot. Many literate Jamaicans love to write to the editor, and hence some choose to vent their frustration and opposition through this medium on a daily basis. At all times following violent protest or activism, significant protest or activism sufficiently significant to cease production, there are noteworthy columns published in the islands, two major newspapers, The Gleaner and The Observer, with writers supporting or denouncing such actions, which is another form of activism. One cannot mention activism and protest in Jamaica and not mention reggae music, the world's first truly protest music. Made popular by Rastafari icon Bob Marley and many others thereafter. A tradition continued to this day by its current practitioners, Queen Ifrica, Sizzla, Anthony B, Kabaka Pyramid, among others. This form of activism is always present, but not always promoted in mainstream media. The following songs are classic protest songs. Get Up, Stand Up by Bob Marley and the Wailers. Revolution by Bob Marley and the Wailers. Satisfaction by Carl Dawkins. Equal Rights and Justice by Peter Tosh. Unchained by the great Bob Andy. Putting Up Resistance by Beres Hammond. No White God by Sizzla, and Daddy by Queen Ifrica. And I could go on naming many more songs. The advent of ICT devices and social media has given activism a different reach. Activists can now organize marches, demonstrations, and protests in quick time, involving people far and wide, including people across the seas and oceans. This was evident in the St. Thomas protest of November 2017. From a Facebook conversation with a friend and subsequent post through the same medium, along with an artistic graphic design circulated through WhatsApp, a mass protest was organized that virtually locked down the parish for 2 days. Activism in Jamaica is alive and well today, and better organized than before, given the access to higher education by more people, access to vast information about rights than any other time known to man, and the enhancement given by ICT devices and social media. However, on the university front, where students were once the vanguard for social and political activism, the spirit needs to be awakened. University students generally have become less active on such fronts and have diverted to focusing on charity programs for the needy and focusing solely on their tuition fees. Only times university students have risen up and gained significant attention from the media and society is when they are faced with a tuition-related issue, be it deregistration or high tuition cost. It is my view that university students, particularly at the UWI, need to rediscover the spirit of activism on behalf of the poor, the neglected, our children, girls, women, and the many ills facing our post-slave neo-colonial society. In concluding, it is my view that activism through various mediums in Jamaica, historically through violent protest and resistance, such as the route taken by many of our celebrated heroes and heroines, have always resulted in the recognition of human rights and discussions that have given people a voice, representation, and recognition. For the foreseeable future, activism will always be a part of the Jamaican society, given the historical context in which modern-day Jamaica was founded: oppression, repression, murder, and self-denigration. A society where the laws were created to protect the slave and slave masters, were created to protect the slave and colonial masters, never the people or the enslaved. Henceforth, the inheritors of this society will always have to be vigilant, active, and alert so their rights and our rights can be met. I leave with this quote from the iconic song by Bob Marley and the Wailers. If you know what life is really worth, you look for yours on earth. Now you see the light. Stand up for your right. Life is right. So you can't give up the fight. Give thanks.
Okay, good afternoon. There's a book that I read. I actually found it someplace. I didn't buy it. I just happened to find the book. I think I was at a conference. And the name of the book is The Heart of Higher Education. And he was talking about the obligation that universities have to their students, to the world they exist in, the environments that surround them, and so on. One of the quotes that I remember from that is that the students aren't bankrupt, it's their university, just that. So I have that idea in my head, Mr. Pereira, as I begin to talk about my own assessment of the university. The university says in its latest strategic plan that it wants to be an activist university. I'm not sure what that means in terms of its students and the citizens of the university. What is the agenda for staff? What's the agenda for students? I think is something that it perhaps needs to work on, but certainly the aspiration to being an activist university is one that is very relevant to this consideration this afternoon. So what I'm concerned with is the UWI MONA, and this idea that the UWI is training, preparing, educating students for the transformation of Jamaican and Caribbean society. And I start with where we are contemplating this weekend, and that is the idea of the university that gave rise, or the environment that gave rise to the Rodney riots, Rodney Rebellion, the 1968 environment. What was it that allowed that to happen? And then to kind of allow us to reflect a little bit about what is here now. What is here now in respect of this university in the wider national and also the global environment. And if it is that that reality can happen again, and if it should happen again, what are some of the realities that we need to consider? So I'll start by saying that for me, the 1960s and 1970s took place in a global context. I think Professor Meeks mentioned that on Friday evening when he remarked that the movement of the 60s was not a national movement. And to me, it was regional and it was international. The issues which galvanized students generally, not just the ones at MONA, were located within a wider global context. And we already know that the 60s and 70s were marked by critical movements and moments. And one of the realities of student activists is that they are galvanized by defining moments in history. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the defining moments of this time, of this reality? What were the defining moments then? In 1959, the Cuban Revolution, I would see as a defining moment that would have politicized the students that came into university and who acted in 1968. I think the students who came to UWI and who were around in 1968 would have been born in 1940-something. And the realities that existed leading up to their entry into university and leading to their graduation from university were instrumental in creating the kind of consciousness as well that would have led them to act and to feel compelled to act on the realities around them. Rastafari and the growing popularity of Jamaican music and the popular ideas that were being promulgated through the music that were reflecting a revolutionary aesthetic, for me, was also a defining moment. The liberation struggles in Africa and the need for black people in the African diaspora to identify with those struggles and to understand the centrality of Africa to their personal and political being was another one. The civil rights movement in the United States, and this had put a number of issues on the agenda, issues of human rights, issues of the environment and women's rights and feminism, and the ideas of the second wave. The anti-colonial struggles of the former British colonies, conversations about independence within the Caribbean, regionalism, federation, statehood, and sovereignty. It was also the height of the Cold War and the battle for world dominance between the USA and the USSR. So it was a time of contestation and controversy. And for me, the realities that existed demanded that you choose a side. Sitting on the fence, at least from where I am looking, seemed to not have been the popular choice at the time. The region and the country, according to Dennis Ben, has the historical ability to use external sources as a reference point. And I remember when I had a conversation with Professor Ben, who was here at the time, and he and I were talking about how ideas from outside of Jamaica, outside of UWI, outside of the Caribbean, influenced what was happening in the Caribbean at the time. So people like Amilcar Cabral, Che Guevara, Mao Zedong, Ho Chi Minh, Fidel Castro, Basil Davidson, Eduardo Manlani, Malcolm X, and Frantz Fanon were the ideologists and activists who inspired Caribbean academics and activists to take on the ideas that they have of statehood, state and being, human being. Figueroa notes that these were household names and their ideas and activities inspired a generation in search of a more equitable society. There was also significant intellectual leadership from within the Caribbean in the ideas of the New World Group, who were themselves responding to criticisms of the black intelligentsia. According to Ben, they questioned older models of society, older models of development, because in their mind, the university, which had gained its independence in 1962, needed to look inside the Caribbean in order to define its scholarship. They provided the intellectual leadership and mentorship that helped to make the particular area a time of academic ferment. In 1944, Jamaicans had won the right to vote. And in 1962, there was independence. But the racial structure that was in place before independence was still very much in place. The conditions that led to an awakening of black consciousness among working class Jamaicans, particularly those in the urban centers. In response to this, the Shearer-led government of the 1960s did recognize that the patience of black Jamaicans were being worn thin. And so they adopted a moderate form of black power in the 1960s. And we saw that with the return of Marcus Garvey's body to Jamaica. Somebody commented yesterday that we returned his body, but not his ideas. In 1965, Martin Luther King visited the island and attended a graduation ceremony here at UWI. In 1966, Haile Selassie visited Jamaica, and this visit was perhaps the most impactful and meaningful of any head of state. The reception he received from working class Jamaicans and the Rastafarian community took the state and the middle class Jamaicans by surprise. Rupert Lewis notes that Emperor Haile Selassie's visit to Jamaica in 1966 highlighted the enormous social and cultural influence of the Rastafarian movement at the time. In the Jamaican context of the 1960s, Ethiopia's monarch became a symbol of reverential counterpoint to the British throne. The tensions were also evident in the anti-Chinese riots of 1965 and the Carroll Gardens uprising in 1963. So something that Professor Meeks mentioned Friday, as well as him being a student of JC, and the fact that high school students themselves who were being matriculated to UWI were themselves already kind of radicalized before they came on campus. So they came on campus already having some idea of themselves as radicals from high schools, having lived through the times where they saw the state as the enemy. So for me, those were the defining moments that existed at the time that would have helped to conscientize, if you want, or to develop within students an awareness of the fact that the realities that they were faced with, the global, regional, and national realities, needed to be addressed. So the word now is woke. They became woke then, for want of a better word. And this was not just something that was internal to them. The external realities also drove that awakening. So I want to look at what is happening now. I think we live in an age of the death of big ideas. The ideological contestations which facilitated critical thinking and the birth of creative intellectualism are not currently a feature of the UWI. The struggles between the USSR and the USA are a thing of memory. The left is dead, and what now prevails is an acceptance of the neoliberal framework. The market is accepted as the truth. How do we engage this generation of students when we are no longer committed to big ideas? How do we engage students when pragmatism has won and idealism is seen as the stuff of fools? How do we engage students when they themselves are struggling to survive the crippling impact of poverty? The poverty that we now fight is not just a material poverty, it is a poverty of thought, a poverty of ideals, a poverty of hope. My own experience at the UWI over the last 10 years has introduced me to realities that I thought would not have featured here when I started my sojourn as a student 20 years ago. Homelessness within the student population, material poverty which sees students teetering on the brink most of the time, mental health issues among undergraduates, violence in ways we have not imagined. I think as well we need to account for cable television's impact on the minds of our young people. What is reflected as the global identity of college students, the sexy college co-ed, drinks too much and has too much sex, is what Hollywood started feeding to our youth of what university life is about. In the midst of their miseries, the willingness of liquor companies like Red Stripe and Appleton to provide excessive amounts of free liquor. Now our student leaders are courted by sponsors who give them gifts of free phones and t-shirts and sponsorship for their parties. The regionalism that was a core feature of UWI reality is long dead. Each campus has successfully replicated what the other was supposed to specialize in. When non-Jamaican students come to Mona, their defining feature would appear to be the fact that they have money and Jamaican students do not. The cleavages and the divides being created are primarily along socioeconomic lines. The haves and the have-nots are here, and we know which faculties they study and which halls they live on. The UWI has expanded access to all and sundry, I once heard someone remark. Whereas the population of students here are still primarily graduates of colonial high schools for the most part, the Monroe and Woolmers, etc., students are now matriculating from Magotty and Lacovia High, Greenpond High, etc. They come with a confidence gap that is borne out during Schools Challenge quiz because they don't take over a tree. So you don't see them wearing purple or green because they're not as confident as the Calabar or blue. They walk through the campus wanting to not be seen because they don't have an entry in School Challenge quiz or champs. Thirdly, where I see possibility for activism is around the personal, sexuality and sexual rights, and the place of women in the university. But let me say that as it relates to the Guild of Students and student government, we have had 66 years of guild leadership and 66 presidents, and of that number, 8 have been women, and of that 8, 2 had to resign from office. The anti-woman sentiment among the student population is devastating to the well-being and empowerment of women. Talks of no panty government, Ryan knows much about that, proliferate. Practices such as pantytry and poo songs which denigrate women and increasing violence against women, including sexual violence, proliferates on the campus. The language in the lecture rooms, including from lecturers, would imply that there are too many women at UWI. An intolerance which was birthed in the perennially present male marginalization theory, which remains in the minds of the young men at UWI, an excuse to demonstrate an intolerance for women. Yet this is a campus with a population of over 70% women. LGBTQ students have also been at the receiving end of the intolerance and hostility, bullying, verbal abuse, and outright antagonism. So the question of why the global phenomena of Me Too has not taken root here is in part attributed to the university's insistence that its reputation must be protected. It is also attributed to the acceptance and perpetuation by young men of the hegemony of male leadership, sexism, and an inability to critique a patriarchal institution. The one tradition that lives on at UWI is that men and women are not equals, and that women can be in the university, but only as second-class citizens. I'll stop here.
Minutes. I'm a man of very few words. I don't believe. As a man of very few words and people laugh. Anyhow, good afternoon, sistren, brethren, comrades. I guess you can identify all of those names. What I'm looking at today is organizing in the present and the limitations to activism and organizing. I know the topic is a question of activism today, but I tend to use the term organizing when it comes to pulling people into the struggle, because activism could be petty bourgeois actors going out there and fighting for lower taxes and other things like that. When I speak to organizing, it's a different thing, and I will speak to that today. Currently in Jamaica, and even throughout the Caribbean, and I would also say in the imperialist centers, North America, Europe, there are very few organizing that is taking place. We're mostly mobilizing. And people may say, well, organizing, mobilizing, is there a difference? But I'm in the tradition of Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, in making a difference between organizing and mobilizing. And if it was a lecture, I'd probably throw the question out there. And if I had a time, what are the differences between organizing and mobilizing? When we mobilize, there's certain mobilizing as a method of seeking social change, or what people may say as social justice, because that can be a contested term. There are certain qualities or characters about mobilizing. It's elite driven. Therefore, the organizational and movement leaders are the ones that have the more sought after skills. The managing, the directing, the theorizing, they are the ones who control that. So it's a very organizational and movement lead driven, and it's also episodic. What do I mean by that? Police come into a working class community and they shoot down somebody, and we decide we're gonna go out and protest. But police violence is an everyday reality in working class communities. But we're not organizing cop watch, we're not organizing self-defense networks so we can challenge killer cops in our communities. We're not dealing like cop watch programs so we can videotape them and use that, not necessarily we're going to win advantages in their courts, because as we can see in the imperialist United States, even when we see police shoot down African people, especially from the working class, it means nothing to white juries. They look at it and they're saying that, this person was threatening the police officer. What cop watch and videotaping police does, at least for me, is to build up a certain type of anger in the people. So in the long term, we may be able to match fire with fire. Because we have to justify it, because one of the things with the oppressed, we're very patient with the oppressor. We're impatient with each other. We will go at each other within a second, but we tend to tolerate a lot of abuses, but there's usually a limit. Another feature of mobilizing is that it's reactive. We're not proactively organizing because we're living in an oppressive condition. So if we hear that someone has been racist or sexist or homophobic, we will respond to that. We're always reacting to things. Another feature of it is that it has limited participation. For example, trade union movement. They will bring out their members, and I was a trade unionist while living in Canada. They'll bring out their members for whether it's a Labor Day rally or strike support, but then they send us back home for us to sit down and wait until the next call. So that's what we see going on mostly. The reactive nature of mobilizing, limited participation on the part of the masses of the people who are affected by the injustice in society, and also it's driven by the leaders. That is what defines, these features define activism today. We're mobilizing. Well, what is organizing? Organizing is a different animal and method to social change. For one, it's process. We're not responding to events. We don't need police to kill someone for us to organize against state violence and police violence. We're organizing every day. We have our cop watch programs in place. We have 10 minutes. Okay, we'll speed it up. We will have legal support for people. We will even have prison support programs, because if we are resisting the oppressors, we're going to generate political prisoners. Yes, we're going to have our comrades who will go to prison. So we need to also anticipate that and have support in place so we can visit them, we can put money in their canteen, we can do these other things. We organize in advance of even an event happening. We know these things are going to happen, and we are doing it on a day-to-day basis. So we think long-term. It's also participatory democratic. The people who are affected by injustice are the people who are involved in being the architects of their own freedom. So we have to bring the masses into the organizing process. Case in point, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, when they went into the American South, fighting American apartheid system, and they organized local people to lose their fear of the white supremacist forces and to resist. So they developed local leadership to carry out their work. So after a time, SNCC organizers can go to another community. And Amilcar Cabral did the same thing in preparing for the armed struggle that took place in 1963 in Guinea-Bissau. People are saying, let's go out and fight the Portuguese. You know, they did symbolic attacks. But Cabral, as this disciplined revolutionary, build the capacity of the people where they will go into community. And you will have an organizer enter a community and spend months there trying to organize the people. And once the people are organized in a local village committee, they move on to a next phase. So we ensure that the people who are affected by oppression will lead their struggle. That is what organizing. So we're not highlighting organizational elites or movement elites. We're centering the struggle in the people. The people will be the architects of their own struggle. So we have examples in the Pan-African world of organizing. And clearly, in the imperialist countries, in the global south, we're not doing much in the way of organizing. When we organize, we create programs, projects, and institutions. So we're here in Jamaica, and I hear a lot of Jamaicans saying, you know, the Chinese are taking over Jamaica. And what's interesting, you know, and I think it's like an anti-Chinese racism, I don't hear us talking about the white imperialist, capitalist forces with a larger economic footprint that's robbing the country blind. But what is it about Chinese capitalism that excites us so much? But Chinese state coming here as capitalist operator and Chinese companies coming here as operators. Whether it's African capitalists or Chinese capitalists or white capitalists, we want to liquidate them as a class. We don't favor none. Because the African capitalists will be just as disrespectful and oppressive of Africans as the white capitalists. The African capitalists may use race solidarity to turn us against its competitor, her competitor, Chinese capitalists, or the Lebanese capitalists, or the South Asian capitalists. But we don't favor none of them, because all of them are pirates, as Bob Marley instructed us in Redemption's song, the old pirates who robbed by an eye. So we don't love none of them. We have to organize. For example, if we're organizing against economic exploitation, we would organize worker-owned companies, worker self-managed companies in our fight against capitalism. So that's what organizing is. We're not going and begging the capitalists to give us 2% per year or extend a little benefits. We're creating economic structures that are going to try to undermine the capitalist forces. That's what organizing is. You build, and the thing about why organizing is important, and building programs, projects, and institutions, is that during the low moments of struggle, we have things that we're organizing around. As opposed to mobilizing, we go out and we demonstrate and we give the oppressor a good tongue lashing, and we go back home and watch our TV, the fool's box. That's not what organizing do. We have to run our institutions and our programs and projects day to day. That calls for a different type of mindset. Also, we build the capacity of the people to run their organizations and to run their programs. That's not necessary under the elite-driven model of mobilizing, because the leaders will take care of it. Like Daddy knows best, he will organize things for us and tell us what to do. We expect the people, through our programs that we create, to develop the capacity, the skills, the knowledge, the attitude to carry out their work. So organizing, and as I'm framing it, is a different animal. And we don't do it because it's hard work. It takes a higher level of commitment than going out to a 2-hour protest or 3-hour protest, or blocking streets for even a few hours to 72 hours. The enemy knows that we're mobilizing and they can wait us out. In trade union movement, we call it running the clock, because that's what they do with trade union radicals. They know that, let's run the clock on them. We will exhaust them. The enemy knows that. So they don't fear, they're concerned that you get up, but they say, okay, they're protesting police brutality, they're blocking the road, they're burning tires. Let's wait them out for 72 hours, and we go back home until the next killing. That's mobilizing. In Jamaica today, in terms of organizing, it is largely driven by NGOs. Those of us who know the role of NGOs in the imperialist countries and the role they play abroad, we know that they're instruments of imperialist forces. Canada, Britain, United States, Japan, they are the soft part of imperialism. They come and they dig a well and they teach us English, or they say we deal with gender-based violence, or those other things. But why didn't they liberate their people in the imperialist countries? They're here to undermine the struggle for justice. When you're working in NGOs, you can't be a radical. You may be a radical, but what you're doing is really social service work. You cannot touch the structural issues in society. The question of land ownership, like we need land reform in Jamaica. We don't look at the issue of the disempowerment of workers, women, the structural oppression of women. We can't touch those questions. We touch the more peripheral ones, even though they're important and we'll be feeding people and those things. But we have the capacity and the resources to feed ourselves and to organize and demand certain things from the state. Because we're not going to do some quietism thing and run away from the state. We're going to engage the state militantly. That is not what's going on in Jamaica. It's too much dependent on NGOs to carry out the work of radicalism and revolution. So since I have less than 5 minutes, there's some other points I wanted to raise. And I did say that I'm going to have very few words, so I'm going to stay within the 15 minutes. What must be done? One, we must embrace organizing as the method of liberation. Today, or yesterday. But today, I'll generous, I'll extend the deadline. We must embrace a revolutionary intersectional analysis to oppression and liberation. Therefore, you can't say that you're for African liberation, but you're not for queer liberation. You can't say you're for African liberation, but yet you can't say you're for African liberation, but you support capitalism. One of the reasons why Siaga was comfortable bringing back Marcus Garvey here is that Marcus Garvey's pro-capitalism, or robust support for capitalism, made him comfortable. So he could bring back, you won on two fronts. Garvey as a symbol of African nationalism, and he was aware of the popularity of Garvey, but also Garvey's support for capitalism made him comfortable to bring back his bones here. So a lot of people say he didn't bring back Garvey's ideas. He brought back the more palatable part of Garvey's ideas is support for capitalism. I mean, no so well upon no jump on me after this, but as I'm saying about broad. We also must live and organize in working class communities. Too often, those of us who are revolutionaries and radicals live in the petty bourgeois areas, but we don't live among the people. And I'm talking about as someone with experience living in the global north, that's what we do. Those of us who are radicals don't live in working class communities. We live in areas that are safer and rents are higher. But today, if we're organizing, we must live with the people. Amilcar Cabral demonstrated that in terms of, the part of African independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, the organizers lived among the people. SNCC did the same thing. They went among African people in the American South and rural areas. And I know some of those rural areas. I spent 4 years organizing in rural Alabama and the American Southeast, working with African American farmers, doing cooperative development work. That is where we need to do. We also must organize around the needs of the people. So if people need food, we start to organize cooperative supermarkets. We can organize to decommodify food, where we start to produce backyard gardens or occupy spaces where we produce food and shift food out of the buying and selling matrix that's out there. Undermine that. Again, we must build the capacity of the people, so we need capacity building programs to give people the skills that they need to do the work, and we must carry out public education, ideological education, because We're not messing around with capitalism, or patriarchy, or white supremacy, or homophobia. We must go out there and organize and educate the people. So anywhere and anytime the people call upon us, even if it's only 3 of them, we will go out there to do public educational work. There's some other points I can bring up in the Q&A. I did say I'm a man for a few words, so I'll stick to that.
No, this has been a very, very interesting and enlightening session, but unfortunately, it's a session that started late. This means that we have about 20 to 25 minutes for Q&A. What I'm going to do is to ask individuals who are interested in addressing any questions to our panelists to just make a line. There's a microphone here, there's a microphone there. And what I'll do first, or rather what I am recommending that we do, is that we take the questions. So just write them down, and then we'll pause after maybe 3 questions on each side, and then they can address, they can provide the answers. All right, so I see we have the line, well, at least on the left-hand side, the line's beginning. All right.
Yes.
Well, my left.
Greetings. Michael Barnett here from this very same campus, sociology, psychology, social work. Very provocative presentations by everyone, but and my colleague, Ajamu, we've had conversation about this, but there is something I have to insert, I think, quite urgently, and that is that Marcus Garvey practiced cooperative economics, and you must not confuse his conception of economic nationalism with capitalism per se. I think, one has to be discerning that Garvey's philosophy of cooperative economics was for the upliftment of African people generally, and in a way that collectively the African population would improve their lot, not that you'd have this hierarchical structure that white or European capitalism promotes. So be very careful in your rebuttal of Garvey's principles, and it is, obviously I am pro Marcus Garvey, but also bear in mind that other black leaders in the struggle also argued for economic nationalism. Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture, was a strong advocate, SNCC, right through to his mobilization of Lyons County and so forth. His thing was, he was encouraging those communities to empower themselves through economic nationalism, cooperative economics, and he was influenced by the Honorable Marcus Garvey. So I just wanted to put that in there as a, as a book note or footnote. Thank you.
Carolyn Cooper. My question is for Ajamu as well. I consider myself to be a revolutionary living in the hills. So, so my question is really about the revolutionary living among the oppressed. And knowing Jamaican people, as I think I do, I think many Jamaican people who are living in quote-unquote underprivileged communities actually want to get out. So I don't know that they would welcome people with privilege coming to live with them to help them, so to speak, if that helping is not going to improve their condition. So I just want to ask you, as a revolutionary living in the heart of the oppressed communities, living in the bush, quote unquote, what has been your experience of the response of the oppressed to your position as a quote unquote relatively privileged person coming to live among them? Ajam knows I've asked him the question all the time, but I have to ask him in public.
I have 2 questions. One to Dr. Nangoya and the other to Ms. Spence. The first one, to Ms. Spence, the inequality question. She is quite head up about the male-female equation. I just wondered, one, is it such a good thing really to challenge this? Absolutely, because the whole structure of our societies, our Western societies, civilization is based on biblical exegesis. Everything is controlled by the Bible. When you go to the courthouse, what do? You swear on the Bible. The judiciary, everything is backed up by the Bible. And the Bible is patriarchal. It's not matriarchal. And, it is inclined to favor, the male ideas about things. So when we challenge this, absolutely, what do we get? We get the gay flag movements. We get challenges to heterosexual production of offspring. In fact, right now, there are even some scientists in my discipline who have succeeded in mating 2 male cells to create a new being. So it's a really frightful thing. If we pursue your line of reasoning, absolutely, that is where we'll end up, because they'll use your line of reasoning to justify. They say, okay, if we can have this equality then, well, why not 2 males hooking up or 2 females? They've done it for 2 females, successfully created new offspring from 2 females. It's quite easy to do. I could do it myself, but nobody's going to finance it here. 2 males was more difficult, but they have done it. Its only thing is that the cell did not last very long. I think maybe a few hours. But eventually, they refine the process, and that's what we're going to get. So I think ultimately, if you examine this inequality question or challenge, I think we should rephrase it to a complementarity challenge and say, okay, male and female, we're different. We're dimorphous, and the Creator intended it that way. People may jump on me and say, how can I accept the Bible and all the rest of it? But for better, for worse, richer, for poorer, that's how the system works. And it is still going on, and it's not going to stop. So should we challenge? Absolutely, that's a question for you. Shouldn't we go to a complementarity thing and say, let us complement one another and see where we can reach? The question to Dr. Nangwaya is based on my own experiments in Mafuta, St. James. I spent my own money with support from my partner. Both of us came from England, and we invested in the Mafuta community, and we supported setting up business which is community-driven. I attended many meetings. They said, oh, Doc, come to this, and, your ideas and so on. We even got a consultant. The Jamaican government sent a consultant to advise the people on how to proceed. And the consultant was supposed to relate to me. I'm a British consultant, but also recognized by a Jamaican system. The Jamaican system put me there many years ago. However, what I found in practice, we're talking about in practice now, does it really work? You have some great ideas, and all you said is perfect. But to implement it, what we found is that people up there are very laid back, and it's a ganja smoking area, in that way. When you you go to the meetings and you have these fine discussions, but when you're seeking volunteers, people to come forward, no one wants to take responsibility. And if people take responsibility, then their personality challenges. Jamaican people are very fractious, and the least little thing, they find some argument and so on. And then that's it. The meetings become disrupted, and then eventually nothing gets done. I'm not up, well, I'm up there, but not up there. I'm down here now, and I was hoping that this university would get into it. But I'm saying we need to address that part of it.
We're kind of running short of time. It's a comment. Can I take the next person, please?
Hello, my name is Isis Samaj Hall. The comment, which might also be a question, I think it leads into a question, is regarding student activism or activism, like you're talking about in this panel, activism today. What does it mean for Jamaica? What does it mean for the young people in particular? Something I've been struggling with since I've been at the university since 2016 is when I'm meeting with my students, particularly the ones in the reggae poetry course or in any of the Caribbean literature courses, there is a way that the students seem to already understand the material and then are closed off from wanting to know more or any interest in the additional, right? So there's an expectation, yes, well, reggae music is this. Yes, we know what it's come from. We know what to expect. Here are the formulaic bits and pieces of it. they don't find it revolutionary anymore, right? And so my question is either what has happened to reggae music or what has happened to the listener that it doesn't push or provoke people to do something to make any kind of change. And I had a student last semester who was visiting from the UK who posed this question to the class, and he said, it's just not effective. Did you all realize that this music is no longer effective? And the Jamaican listeners, the Jamaican classmates said, oh, I guess it isn't. And there was this kind of shrug of the shoulders, and then everyone moved along to the next point without any regard. This semester, I'm teaching an African-American literature class, and when I got into the teaching of W.E.B. Du Bois, when I got into comments on Marcus Garvey, it was the same kind of nonchalance, just, okay, yeah, we know who Garvey is, all right, yeah, the color line, interesting. I asked the students to think about, have they ever felt that they were a problem? Right, so this is Du Bois's words, right? How does it feel to be a problem? This is The Souls of Black Folk, 1903. And the students were like, oh, I've never really felt like that. I never felt like I was a problem. That's just not something I can relate to. I'm like, no way, no possibility. Can you stretch your mind? Can you think back when you were 1, 2, 3? Nope, don't really relate to that. So I'm wondering what's happening. What is going on today that there isn't this capacity to relate to the material, to think that it is something foreign and external, even if it's in your own backyard? I hope you have an answer to that. The other part is, with regard to everything that we're talking about today and yesterday, and we're thinking about protests and demonstrations, the only one that I can think of readily in Jamaica lately that has crossed class is the Tambourine Army. And that's because it was dealing with women. And so all of the women that experienced sexual abuse, whether they were from the lowest denominator to the highest echelons, they gathered together and were on the streets together. Is there any way you can respond to that, right? To how class is functioning within this, right? This risk-taking or this fear of risk-taking that there seems to be, what can change that, what can challenge that? And it goes back to, I think, Dennis Brown, when he posed the very question, do you know what it means to have a revolution? I don't think we do. I don't know if we lost the formula, if we lost the focus, or just lost the willingness to take a risk, but I don't think we any longer we realize what it means to have a revolution.
All right, so this will be our last question before the presenters respond.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Chevon Brown. I have a question for Ms. Spence. I hear you say you paint a dark reality of what UWI is presently. You are reflecting from the past and saying what is going on in the future. I want you to explain, because what I realize is your statements or your speech gravitated towards what I heard from actually Trump when he won the inauguration speech, a dark place, whereas sexism run UWI and violence, and persons are stopping persons from believing are fighting for what they believe. But I still believe, sir, if you're not part of this, the solution, you're part of the problem. Explain yourself for me, please.
Unfortunately, I see that hardly anybody asked Omar a question. So, Mr. Ryan, I'm taking chair's prerogative. My question for you is, how do you see your activism as part of a long history of protest in Jamaica? And how has the history of St. Thomas influenced your activism? All right, so who wants to go first?
Bell Hooks talks about transgressing, right? Yeah. How do we create students and how do we create a university that teaches people to transgress or to fight systems of oppression, right? How do we develop a pedagogy for the oppressed? What is the methodology for engagement to liberate? And who are the people who become the subject of that engagement. So the gentleman who spoke about patriarchy being, perhaps what we should all do is stop going to church. If church is the problem, then church is the problem. It can't be that because church is the problem, we decide to conform to it. I have a problem with that idea that because the Bible, which was put together by men to suit their particular purpose at their particular time, says that we must engage life a particular way, that women must conform, and men don't know what complementarity means. What is the system that complementarity exists in? I have lived, if it still exists in patriarchy, then the problem is inequality. And that's the problem that we need to fix. And the problem that we need to fix is for men to understand that privilege is something that they have to give up for women to become full citizens. And I know that there are men who are benefits of patriarchy's largesse, don't like that, but it is the truth. You have to, if you are able to see racial injustice, if you are able to see socioeconomic injustice, why can't you see sexism? And why can't you see that it's unjust for one group of people to hold back another, i.e. men and their part in women's subjugation? I don't have conversations with men who cannot see that as a starting point of the conversation. I just don't. Just like as a black woman, if you see black people as equal, me not talk to you. I'm not contesting my identity, I'm a woman. And so when a man says, you must accept your inequality, I view that as a problem.
Sorry, I'm just saying I'm not telling you that inequality should be.
Sorry, this is a time for the panelists to respond.
I think, okay, the issue of students and their ability to, I think, you know what, the students who are in UWI this year were born in 1999 and 2000 in the majority. There's a university, Beloit College, I think in the US, that does a mindset survey every year that gives people who teach university students a kind of rundown of the realities that have developed, that are a part of the mindset of the students coming into university. And what we don't recognize, like the students now don't know who Michael Manley is. So when you talk to them about Michael Manley, to them is a foreign subject. They don't know. The things that we think are natural and sexy as revolutionary people, them have no idea. We have to teach it to them from a totally different place. And our methodologies of engagement have to be different. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Walter Rodney's groundings, the idea of, Ira Shore speaks about it, leveling the classroom, breaking down the hierarchies of engagement. As professor, how do I engage you? Am I particularly keen on my profession, or am I also willing to learn from you and learn what you bring and how you see it? I engage young women. I have 250 young women who live on Mary C. Cole Hall who I engage with on a daily basis. And what I have come to recognize is that they are unimpressed by my knowledge. Them no care. They're unimpressed by titles, and the more you resort to holding on to your titles, the more unimpressed they are. And so the idea of a university that is steeped in hierarchy and professorships, particularly ours, is a problematic one to them. Because what I was going to say is the big idea that this generation is fighting is the big idea of inequality. That's what they're concerned with. So not democracy, not racism, but inequality. Now, if we can manage to stretch that idea of inequality and equality across the subject, whether the environment, then we are on our way. But we have to recognize that, particularly for our Jamaican students, those of us who like the PNP and the JLP and like talk about Siaga and Manley and them things, especially when we talk about our politics, them don't know them people there. They have no idea who they are. And so it's not a part of their formative knowledge base. They were born in 2000. Imagine what has taken place in Jamaica from 2000 to now. That is what they heard and what they know and what they grew up on. Different generation. And the gentleman who spoke about, I don't know what you asked me. No, I wasn't answering you. I'm asking you, I'm trying to remember your question. Well, it is in a way. Right. But it has always, one of the things I wanted to say to you is this. In 1968, when we were struggling for the 1968 rebellion on campus, what I would like to sit and ask Professor Lewis and the others of us in here who were a part of that is what was happening to the women on campus? Were they experiencing liberation from that march? You must always ask that question, you know, who are the people left out of this conversation right here? So, and were the women included at that time? And so my question is, if you are talking about liberation and I as a woman don't feel as if my voice is included in that conversation, you're not liberating me. So for women on the campus, of course it has been dark. It has been. Ask them. And listen to their answers. And don't impose an answer. Ask them and listen. That's what I do. Because I have to engage women on a daily basis. And I ask them. And they tell me. So you have to ask the question of the women who are here. Does it look as bright for you as it does for me? And then let them tell you what the answer is. I have found that when I ask them, they do not feel as liberated by the space as the men do. And that's something that we all should turn our attention to.
Yeah. And that last point, it's just like asking whites and Lebanese and Chinese in Jamaica, how's Jamaica for you? How are you experiencing Jamaica? It will be different from the sufferers. It's, you know, it's still two Jamaicas that we're experiencing, and it's the same thing on campus. And it's established in different ways. If you were going to have a class at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're assuming that people can just come, but what about people with childcare responsibility? Mostly women do those things. I have students who experience those challenges. Trying to get here at 8, and you have to drive east to drop your child off, and then come west and dealing with traffic in this place. It's not designed. It's not a place that's designed for women. UWI is not a feminist university. It may have nice sounding words and say it's going to deal with activism, but there's activism and then there's activism, you know. So, you know, we have to look at that. And being the overwhelming majority doesn't mean that women's needs are centered. Africans, working class Africans in this country are the overwhelming majority, and our needs are not centered in this country. Yet the pirates who run this country that look like us. Even though now increasingly I'm seeing more browning of the main politicians in Jamaica, like maybe because I'm relatively insider, coming back and say, wait, how are going? How would it seem like the browning and the parliamentarians going on in this country? But again, maybe I just have a color problem. So, and also the question of complementarity, that sounds so outdated. That's like, I associate that with Ron Karenga, who talks about men and women are different, they have complementary roles, but the roles that the men have are celebrated roles, and the roles that women have, you know, take care of the people of them, you know, do all of the work, stroke the man's ego. You know, that's why marriage is such a beneficial thing for men. And I say to my female students, we need to run away from marriage, because that institution is an institutionalized form of patriarchy that you're going to put in most of the work. The benefits you may get is that your standard of living may be a little bit higher, because in general, men earn more than women. Because even in Jamaica, women earn 64 cents of each dollar of their male counterpart on average. So marriage becomes this type of institution where you can try to level the playing field. And that's why I equate marriage as akin to prostitution or sex work, you know. But anyhow, at a different lecture, I will take up that thing. But it's a point that I raise, that marriage is akin to prostitution. If you look in terms of selling your sexual services, and you get in reward in return, material benefits. But please don't drag me upon the marriage thing. Yeah, Jamaica. Well. To my comrade, Michael Barnett, Marcus Garvey has, and why people say, I read something by Bogues recently, where he put Marcus Garvey in the socialist tradition. I almost lost my lunch. Yeah, I'm like, what? But anyhow, Marcus, and the reason why people are saying that is that Garvey had a $2 million limit on ownership in a company, individual ownership, and it was $5 million for corporate ownership. Recently, I did a conversion. I think it's the 2 million or the 5 million. And 2 million or 5 million today in US dollars would be about $60 million. How many working class people can invest $60 million in a company or own $60 million worth of shares in a company? Marcus Garvey's economic program was for the African petty bourgeoisie. They would have benefited from Garvey's approach to economic development. When we talk about Garvey's cooperative economics, we're not talking about the Rushdalian cooperative where you have this democratic ownership of capital and essentially own. Garvey wanted to set up a thing. It would benefit African and the working class, but the ownership under capitalism would have accrued to a small minority in the African empire that Garvey would have created. So today when I see many nationalists, African nationalists, not interrogating Garvey's capitalism, I see it as ideological backwardness because it's akin to Africans saying we're coming from a long line of kings and queens. So what we're doing is identifying the history of kings and queens and not the history of the producing classes or groups who produce the wealth. It's ahistorical, it's backward. In 2018, and that's why when we talk about educating, both in political education in the global south and the global north, we must center class. And we must center capitalism alongside the other systems of oppression. It's not socioeconomic differences, we're talking about class differences, your relationship to the means of production and how that affect your relationships in the broader society. And we have to do that seriously because in the global north, we will talk about white supremacy, but we don't play class differences between us. And so that's the reason why Africans all over the world, and many progressive people took curious position when they supported Obama in 2008. I'm going to illustrate that, but it's because we lack a class analysis, not realizing that Obama would become an agent of imperialism, an agent of white supremacy, an agent of capitalism, and an agent of patriarchy by virtue of his position as the head of an imperialist country, the major imperialist country in the world. We must take class into consideration. Garvey's economics, in terms of capitalism, is not good. In terms of self-reliance, in terms of building a global trading system where Africans can utilize the resources for self-development under a cooperative, a socialist program, I'm in favor of that. Group economics, I think, is a critical part of it. But it's not exclusive because if we're doing the group economics under cooperative or labor self-management, we would also cooperate with workers who are under self-management in India, in China. Our objective is to destroy the capitalists, not to play around with them because they share the same pigmentation. Because the domestic workers in African in Jamaica working for a petty bourgeois or a top bourgeois African in this country, now look at them and say, oh, we're one. They're probably going to use, I don't want to use colorful language coming to this nice university, but they will probably look and say, these people are pirates. They don't have no identification with them. So class, it's important that we have to really critique Garvey and that coming us all upon us to teach Garvey in school while we're going to teach Garvey's capitalism. What has been the response of the people to me over in the working class community in Garden Town? When I went there first and I started to dig up my yard and planting it, and people come. First, I started to plant flowers at outside the gate. People don't plant flowers there, but it was a garbage dump at the end of the wall when I moved in. So I went, took it out, cleaned up, and the same day plant flowers there. And the people come to me and say, "Boy, we love what you do, because when the garbage gets high and they burn it, it affects the wires we have, and we love what I do. So I talk to them about a resident association and all them things. And the people say, you don't know them people here, you know. Them are old nigger. You don't want to involve with them, you know. Stay away from them. That's what, and you know, I must try to diminish that and say, nah, man, like, you know, if people are like that, there's a reason why we're like that and all them things. But a lady came to me and said, okay, she realized, as quickly people know who you are, like they talk, and people are like, hey, doc, and I'm like, how do you know my identity? You know, it's like, but people talk. One person here attended the news spread about who this new person is in the community. 2 families came to me and asked me to go tutor their kids, and I'm saying, I don't deal with individual tutoring, but let's create a parent-run program so it can benefit all the children. One person was willing to even pay me, but don't want to associate with the other people in the community. We're dealing with some challenges in terms of how we've internalized negative ideas about ourselves, you know, and also in terms of our roadway. Like when water comes down the hill, it does erode the place. And I'm talking to people, let's fix it. I have to fix it myself. When people promise me I'm going to come 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm out there. They don't come. Even Labor Day, the first Labor Day was there, we were supposed to fix the road, never get fixed. And I did it by myself because I'm digging out a place to plant food because I believe in self-sufficiency. And I take the stones out and I fix the road, and people recognize what I've done, but it's hard. And that's why we need organizations, not just about individuals. We must have organizations so we can do the work. Recently I was invited to come and participate in the citizen organization in the community. So that is gonna be my way to get in and do the work. It's not about individuals, because I'm a group, I'm an organization man. I believe in organization, I devote my time to them when I'm in them. That's the only way we're gonna move forward, and that's a central part of the organizing model. You must be in organization, even inefficient organization. At least you're able to mobilize resources and people better than individuals. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and I experienced the same thing in Alabama. I went into a community and I ended up being like the only market rent person there. And people were like, why would you move here? We're trying to get out. And you come into this community, and I'm saying, I'm here, I want to organize, you know? And I've also learned things about there that when you go into a place, just patiently do your thing and let people come to you. There I went around, you know, I realized there's food security issues. Let's organize a community garden, and with my clipboard and survey questions, I realized people weren't interested in community garden. What they're interested in is backyard garden in their own space, not over a space that the landlord was willing to allow us to plant in. So, you know, it's 18 months that I'm living there and I'm being patient. There are people who have asked me for help in terms of how to plant food in their yard and provide things, and I'm doing that. But I think the best thing is to be in the citizens organization that's working for all of Gordon Town and work through there in terms of the ideas that I have. It's not easy. There are moments you're thinking, well, forgive my Jamaican here. There are moments you're thinking that, damn, you see why people want to leave. The loud noise, the constant, how easy it is to get into physical conflict with people, which I've experienced. Like a man, you know, I was goat eating my flowers, and the 4th time, I had to tell him a lot of plot and stop. I must think that you are UWI youth, and I get to youth also. That not some school face and hold up a cloth and say, look, now do this, you know, and him goat stop. I've not had a problem again. Him start tie up him goat. So, you know, no, I'm a vegetarian. So, yeah. I could respond to the reggae thing too, you know, because I teach a Bob Marley course last summer, and students don't know the lyrics of many of Bob Marley's songs. When we do content analysis, they start to develop a greater awareness and appreciation for Marley. What we need to do is to integrate the work of our cultural workers in our lectures so that they analyze the songs and also update the songs. Because I'm talking about Tenasaw. I'm a student saying about Tenasaw because I was teaching Proverbs and the message I communicate in my Caribbean folk philosophy class. Them don't know Tenasaw. I say, Tenasaw, some of I play Tenasaw songs, and I was even playing a song, Dignity by Singing Sandra. Calypso, singing Sandra. singing Sandra. And they were asking me if she's singing in Spanish. Like my Jamaican students couldn't hear. They couldn't hear her words because of her accent. And I'm thinking, my gosh. So I have to also update my knowledge of the more recent songs. Because at one point I stopped listening to reggae because I'm saying a fool lyrics them people are come with. And dancehall, definitely, I can cut that out. But I have to listen what my students are listening. So I can use those contemporary songs as examples, not the old-timer songs.
I'll respond to, student activism, where has it gone and such. I really think that because of the society we live in, it doesn't encourage much activism. It encourages much individual attention. My car, my house, my parents, you know, my food that I need to eat. And as what Jamo was saying, yeah, it's difficult to call his name. A lot of individualism in our society. People are not suffering as they used to. You know, some of the people who are suffering, they're in foreign now, sending a lot of money to their barrel picnic, barrel people. You know, so it's a total different society in terms of access to material, access to foreign plane. A lot of the people usually suffer in terms of they couldn't get a visa, they go to the embassy and get turned back 5 times. They now go there and get a visa quick. So, yeah, man, I don't have the embassy turning back people anymore, like in the 90s, you know? So people have more access to things virtually. And because of that now, people don't see themselves as suffering together as a group anymore. It's just the man or the sister in there suffer, oh, I'm sorry for them, we're going to give them some food. It's that kind of mentality. Even with you students, and it's, to me, activism has relegated to charity. Going to mustard seed community and going to one of these communities, giving some clothes, giving some books. We're not concerned about the major big issues again. And as a student leader, when I was a student leader, I had problems with the students, trying to let them recognize that we have issues in society outside of our tuition issues. And if we can galvanize around the broader societal issues, we can have support for our narrow tuition issue here on campus. But you can go on, you're a Rasta man. That's what them said to me. As the question, Nicole, and how has history of St. Thomas influenced my activism? I think greatly. Growing up in St. Thomas, I know for me personally, persons have always called me Paul Bogle since I was a boy still. I remember when I went on a summer holiday when I was 13, and Bridget saw me in St. Catherine and said, first man, him no look like Paul Bogle, but him have Paul money. First man. And so them kind of thing that really influenced me. I say, so I have to do something great then. And growing up, I remember about the protest in St. Thomas was last year, November, and about a couple months before, I took a taxi in Papine, going to the office I was working, because sometime in the nights I just go to the office and work. And I tell him that I'm from St. Thomas, and he say, are you a Rasta? Paul Bogle. I said, no, you remind me of Paul Bogle. And he don't take up anybody else. He just start talking about Paul Bogle and Rasta the night. And dropped me to where I was going was a turn off. He said, no worry about the fear and turn off. And he drive me to where I was going. And park up and talk about Paul Bogle, saying favorite hero. And I remind him of Paul Bogle. And I must do something great. And he's looking out for me to do something great for the people. You know? And I must come and look for him when I do it. You know? So it's that kind of in St. Thomas with my brethren as well. Everybody say, hey, St. Thomas with there, you know. When I take joke, you know, we're rebel people, you know. To me, growing up in St. Thomas, we kind of see ourselves different from other Jamaicans. Really. That's how really we see ourselves in St. Thomas. You can ask my friend here from St. Thomas, we went to the same high school. We see ourselves different. If there's any justice issue, we are going to stand up. I remember on Taylor Hall, forgive me for saying this, but all the time I know a man get boxed down or kicked down was from a St. Thomas man. No care where you come from. If you come from Spanish Town or in a Kingston place, don't tell us where you come from there. We're going to beat you more to show you that St. Thomas man don't take talk from people. Simple as that. You know? And even the other day I was saying it to a friend on Towers and he told me that Is one man him know Pan Towers box down a man is a St. Thomas man do it, you know. I remember on Taylor Hall as well, a couple of years ago, there was some injustice of a virgin who participated the most for the black, and when it came down to election, he wasn't allowed to vote in the black election. One of my virgin from St. Thomas got tear up the election and said, no man, if this man can't vote, nobody can vote. You know, and to me, that's just the spirit of us, and we always tell ourselves that we are the ones who are going to stand up for justice. Because we are from St. Thomas, and plus them fear that way because of that OB or something there, you know? Yeah, so we just tell ourselves that we're not back down, and we have to just stand up. That's how St. Thomas, this history of St. Thomas has influenced me. You know? I know it has influenced other friends. Give thanks.
Now, this was a very lively session, and it is a session that, alas, has come to an end.
You done?
Yes. We have Professor Lewis and Dr. Okenvi, who will be hosting our closing, or who will be providing closing remarks. Thank you, everyone. Another round of applause for our panelists.
Okay, let me thank the last panel for bringing us into the contemporary realities of student life and Jamaican life. Because very often, as academics, we are consumed by our own conceptions of what the world is about. But how people are living it, we need to connect with that reality. And the last panel certainly brought us into contact with that reality, particularly the reality on the Mona campus today and how it differs from where we were 50 years ago. I was asked to give reflections. We have had the conference and the papers have been very good. The discussion which seeks to link the first panel, first panel were from people in the 60s, which included some of the female activists, Jackie Vernon, and at a previous event, Angela Bonnie Heron spoke. Some of the 60s women, some of the women from the demonstration spoke about their experience and particularly the impact of Walter on their lives. So my reflection, 67, 68, going back, taking you back from 2018, going back to 67, 68, was definitely a high point of my undergraduate years at the Mona campus. It was my final year, and during the previous year, I had assignments but no exams at year end. And I think Nadine Spence made the point about semesterization. At this moment, people are going through mid-semester tests. Academics are busy marking. So when the history department spends time, so much time, it really takes a strain and a stress. So having a year where you have no exams means that you can do whatever you want. You do your assignments, but there are no exams. This gives you quality time to actually read books, to actually read books 300 pages, 400 pages, to your heart's content. In 67, I won an academic award. I won an award for academic and extracurricular performance. And I got a grant to travel to a location of my choice. I should mention my parents died when I was quite young. My mother died before I went to high school at age 10, and my father died when I was 15. I think their departure early in my life made me realize that basically whatever happened, it was up to me. And I had 3 younger sisters, and one of whom was challenged educationally and mentally challenged. She just died last September the 19th at nearly age 61. And I mention this because I became the leader of this family as a teenager. So 67, I took a flight to Miami and a Greyhound bus from Miami to New York City with no hotel reservation. I was fortunate at the end of the journey when inquiring about hostels to meet a Jamaican who knew a childhood friend of mine in Harlem. And I got a room in a Harlem brownstone building owned by a Barbadian landlord. My Harlem experience was stimulating intellectually and politically, as I heard the phenomenal essayist and novelist James Baldwin speak on the racial question in the United States, experienced protests against the war in Vietnam, watched television reports of the civil rights marches, went to the cinema, read the newspapers, magazines, books, etc. But Vietnam came home to me also in that year because my best friend in high school, Randolph Edwards, was killed in Vietnam, and his body returned to the town of May Pen for burial. And that was a very difficult experience. I remember when I went to the U.S. Embassy on Duke Street in 67 to get a visa, the consular official, there are not many people going into the embassy on that particular day. He sat me down and showed me a file and said, "This is the file I have on you." Now, it may not be true, it may not have anything on me. It was just intimidation. But I was given a talk about my activities at the Mona campus. New York and that holiday, which I did many things. I can't say all of the things I did, but I worked. I did not have any papers, but I had a card which allowed me to work. But I worked in a garment factory. And in the evening, went into a writer's club. However, the New York period did not really radicalize me. I credit my mother in particular with stimulating my interest in working in communities. My mother spent a lot of time living in Moortown and teaching people. And she had come from a community near a compound where she grew up, Eldersley. And therefore she was familiar with those realities. There was a national movement in Jamaica to which I link my father. And he was a Baptist church minister, and was in the process of transition directly from the British Baptist to the Jamaican Baptist. Now, to come back to my campus days, the UWI Mona days, I was involved with a lot of campus publications, mimeograph publications. Impact, co-edited with Wayne Brown and Keith Goff. Scope, newspaper, 68. I was director of Guild Press. And later on, Bongo Man, which name would give a different indication of where my thinking was, between 68 and 70. And Bongo Man carried some of the materials by Walter Rodney, including one that is not very well known, his statement on Amy Jakes Garvey. I was among the people who introduced him to Amy Jakes Garvey, and he had a good relationship with her. I was glad to see Matthew Smith's film on 1968 with an image of Amy Garvey critiquing the Jamaican political leadership led by Hugh Shearer and debunking the view that blacks had power because you had blacks in politics. The impact of Amy Jakes Garvey and her militancy had a deep impact on me. And I want to comment on something in her relationship with Marcus Garvey. And that is when Garvey was imprisoned between 1925 and 1927, one of the things he instructed, because he gave instructions, was that Amy Jakes should edit Philosophy and Opinions, and these should be distributed to every member of the US Congress, as well as US President. One of the things which struck me about her is that whereas Garvey had the big ideas, she was the person who actually materialized these ideas. The person who actually, when you read her memoir in Garvey and Garveyism, doing that book, editing that book, brought her down to 96 pounds and suffering from eyesight and so on. So there's a way in which they, when people make the comments on gender issue, the historical record needs to include that dynamic. I want to comment also on Nadine Spence and pessimism, a certain pessimism. Nadine doesn't tell people what she is doing. She has diagnosed this campus, but she has done an enormous amount of work on issues of leadership and working with these women. All right? So she needs to complement a self-effacing diagnostic with that which she understands the kinds of intervention which needs to take place. Ajamu, one of the things that Walter Rodney influenced me with is his relationship with Pat Rodney. Ajamu, I can't share your view on marriage at all. His relationship with Pat Rodney on this campus was a relationship of equality. But of course, I don't want to put it only in abstract terms. These were a young, good-looking couple who complemented each other. And therefore, one of the things which we don't talk about is the sex drive of young people in '68. This was a huge thing. When I look back on my diary, you see there's a whole world of sexual engagement that was underway on the campus in '68. Right. Jerry, I'm not going to expose anybody here, but Walter's relationship with Pat, that was the kind of ideal I wanted to have with the person I chose to be my wife, right? I went through a lot of, we were grounding with people, and the grounding wasn't just ideological and reading. At that point, people were engaged with more working class women, as I was, and as Peter Phillips and others were. But it wasn't so easy, the class thing and the question of literacy, the question of cultural levels, all of those things came up. So I just want to say that in looking at '68, let's not only look at the big ideas, but let's look up how people were living and how they were engaging with themselves as human beings. I want to pay tribute to to call some of the names again of the people on the campus who were active in the Black Power movement. Because I think that the regional nature of the campus, Nadine Spence mentioned that Mona is no longer that way, and it's true. The regional nature of the campus meant that we created regional energy and had regional networks. People like Keith Noel, Trinidad and Tobago, the late Bernard Marshall from St. Vincent, Jack Wick Williams, about whom the paper was given yesterday, Eichel Torras, by Dr. Francis. You know, he was actively involved in the Black Power movement. I'm really glad that Donnet did that paper. And before that, Jerry had mentioned Eichel Torras at one of our seminars. But that gives a good idea of this relationship between Rasta and the students, and the history of not only people like Michael Hutchinson, the late Michael Hutchinson, but also people like Lucille Edwards of Barbados, who married Russ Single from Homestead Road. So there's a whole dynamic of relationship with Rasta and with ordinary people that was central to the Black Power movement. This is my, can you give me 5 more minutes? I gave myself the 15-minute check. So there were structures before Walter, and Walter understood those structures and integrated himself with those existing structures. I want to comment on the cooperative basis for the Reverend Claudius Henry's enterprise, not only in Rosalie Avenue in Kingston, but also in Clarendon. When Walter went to the church in Clarendon, the church probably held about 300 people packed. How do you feed those people? Edna Fisher had created not only a fishing business, but also a bakery, a whole place for eating and so on. And very often, whilst people underestimate the importance of entrepreneurship, and if there's one thing that this generation I know better appreciates than the Black Power people did, is the importance of being involved in enterprises and in business. I make no apology for Garvey on this capitalism business. The reason I say that, after China and after Mao Zedong and after Ho Chi Minh and Li Duan and all these people, the leadership of Vietnam had to go to Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore to find out how to get integrated into the world economy in order to feed people, to build hospitals, to do a whole range of things. So you have to open your mind to what the possibilities are for when a country has liberated itself politically. It now has to find the ways and means of meeting people's needs. So if your thing can meet people's needs, fine. But if it can't, you are up shit street. All right? So when it comes to China, I'm clear on this. There's no way Mao Zedong thing could function in the late 80s coming down now. It had to take complex measures which involve some state capitalism in order for China to have done what it did in the last 30, 40 years to bring 200 to 300 million out of poverty. So this is a debate that we have to have with respect to how you construct in the given circumstances alternative economic measures. Very complex question, not a simple one. I want to implore before I conclude that anybody who wants to be a leftist in the Caribbean has to study the period 1968 to 1983. Because that is the period in which the post-colonial radicalism went to its heights. Coming out of the Black Power movement, my own involvement in that, I'll just briefly from memory, is 68 generated a whole activism throughout the region. There is no territory in the Caribbean from Ghana straight to Cuba that I can't visit and I can get a bed to sleep on. No territory, right? And that is extremely important in relationship to regionalism. In 1970, we had a meeting of left-leaning people on a place called Rat Island in St. Lucia. You know Rat Island? Dirk Walker wanted to build a thing there after he got his Nobel Prize, thinking that $1 million was money. So we met in Rat Island in order to assess the Black Power movement. And that was in part a period when the evolution towards Marxism gained some ground. The next period, I would say, is on this campus, the most significant event was the organization to build the University and Allied Workers Union in 1971. And when the workers on this campus threw out the largest union in the island, the Bustamante Industrial Trade Union. And this was a collective effort of both faculty and students, 1971. To follow up on that, 1974, we tried to organize the dock workers. And we were really brutally treated because they brought crash program workers. The PNP brought crash program workers in dumper trucks. And if you see men with knife and axe and cutlass and so on. I got chopped in my head. I had to run onto Marcus Garvey Drive, get a bus, reach to KPH and so on. Monroe was cut all over his back. And a number of people were injured. And that's my experience on the high level people's, what's that? Heavy manners under the People's National Party regime. So I've experienced it both under PNP and JLP. And they're still my friends, but I recognize the way in which the politics has been constructed. So 74, we formed the Workers' Liberation League. And 78, the Workers' Party of Jamaica. But the most regional activity was the involvement of the UWI, and I've checked over 100 UWI academics who volunteered and were asked to go to Grenada. Big sentiment throughout the entire region. At that time, Professor Lloyd Brathwaite was the principal of St. Augustine and approved in quick time this request from the Grenada government. So a strong regionalism that took place. Materials are being written, manuscripts I've read, not only Cord but others have written, which will clarify in some way the Grenada events. The question of what lessons you draw from them is another question. And the question of whether the current generation are interested in that, because that's really way back, as Nadine was pointed out. I mean, 38, when we were in 68, 38 was just 30 years away. 50 years ago was 1918. So, you know, whilst I recommend the study of 68 to 83, in terms of just a upsurge of energy and intellectual engagement across the region. I realized that between 83 and 2018 is a whole new world. And therefore, the connection with the young people, I mean, I see the new world through my grandchildren, young teenagers now. And you have to learn the world through their devices, what they are watching, what they are playing with, what they are listening to. So, but the basis exists for connections. And you have to learn to talk to people, right? Talking to a 13-year-old is not an easy thing to do. You have to learn to talk to them. So my conclusion is that the issues which were raised by Horace Campbell, that whole agenda on self-emancipation, you have to find a language that relates to the present. And this is where the creative people come in, people like Michael Holgate and what they can do with dance, music, and drama. The people who can do animation, what they can do with that. Because believe me, the kind of political theory that I taught Nadine is not the political theory I can connect with this generation. So we need the artists on Brown. But I want to also say that Black Power had a science and technology dimension. And Carl Blackwood, who built satellites out of California, was one of the leaders of the 1970 Black Power in Trinidad. And when I met him a couple of years ago, Carl Blackwood was still hopping from the police beating he got in Trinidad in 1970, which almost left him crippled. I want to end by saying I graduated in 1968 with Marcus Garvey Jr. Marcus Garvey Jr. decided that he would shift from law, which he went to England to study, to do maths and physics. And he came in as an evening student, graduated here in physics, and then did a master's in physics, which is in this thing. He then went to work in Bell Labs, but before I should say that he taught maths at Casey and Kingston Technical. And when you hear Marcus talk about physics and maths, the passion with which he brought to bear on that, and I'm quite clear that one of the reasons why Bell Labs employed him to do fiber optics. And I have a letter that he wrote me explaining the importance of fiber optics for modern communication. I just want to say that whilst we have not considered science and technology, that the Black Power movement had individuals in it who were really up on some of the things which we now take for granted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lewis. Just very quickly, just remind you that the event, the last 2 days have been recorded and it will be rebroadcast. I hope this will not lead to anybody being banned from the country, but let me, in case it happens, let me assure you that I will be spearheading that march, protesting against such action. We're gonna do two things here. I was supposed to give the closing remarks, but also there is Matthew Smith that, as many of you know, if you don't know, has been a crucial element in organizing and making this conference and also the exhibition possible. He has sent a message which will serve as a vote of thanks. So I'm gonna save some time so Susan can read Matthew's words. But before that, let me just say a few things. Let me just express my big and sincere thanks to all of you, especially the presenters, it is the presenters who, to me, had made this event so special, but also you, the audience, who participated, have engaged with them actively, and who have made this, to me, a wonderful experience. Also, I wish to give a big thanks to the members of the department. And by members of the department, I'm not just talking about the staff. Also, I'm including here the students, particularly the History Club, who also have contributed enormously to making this possible. In fact, I have to tell you that I'm amazed about how much we have achieved with so little. All of you, probably most of you, do not know what the type of resources that we have, but we didn't have many resources. And I just looking at what the last 2 days, I insist, I'm amazed at how much we've been able to make, with so little. We got some support from the Office of the Campus Principal. We also got support from the Faculty of Humanities and Education that make the facilities available. But mostly it was the History and Archaeology resources, the History and Archaeology Department resources, the human resources that have contributed to this. I'm very proud of the team that we have. And I honestly believe that their work is testimony to the idea that was mentioned this morning, dignity of labor. Let me also apologize for those things that did not go so well or according to plan, especially yesterday's final panel. I feel that we shortchanged that panel, and I sincerely apologize for that. And any other things, any other flaws that you may have seen. I still hope, however, that we can all focus on and take home with us what went well, those things that went well, and I believe that many things went well over the last 2 days. And this is reflected in many ways by the rich ideas and the inspiring examples shared over the last 2 days. Personally, and this is just the last thing I'm going to mention before we move on to the vote of thanks or to Matthew's words, let me just say something about some of the inspiring things and some of the things that the last 2 days have helped me to reflect on. As a lecturer in history, in the Department of History and Archaeology, there's something that became very clear to me over the last 2 days, and I think we all need to reflect on. I think Rodney used the past as a tool to engage with the present. Didn't use the past to escape from the present, but to engage with the present. And to him, using the past and engaging with the present, it was a way to come up with an alternative future, to imagine an alternative future, and then begin to construct it. And I think that connection between past, present, and future is essential. For those who think that past is of no relevance, believe me, I don't think we can even imagine a future unless we take into account that past. And I think Rodney's example is proof of that. Also, let me mention something about the idea of the passivity of students today, or the lack of activism that we see today. There are many reasons for that, and some of those reasons have been mentioned. But one of the things that I have come to learn, particularly over the last two years, I've been living in Jamaica for 14 years. I think I've been teaching now for 11 years. And in many ways, my mind has been always in a different place. I don't come from here, and I engage with different realities and hoping that the realities that I left behind will be changed at some point. But over the last few years, I've become more and more in tune with the realities here. And one of the things that I realized speaking to my students is that, unfortunately, I don't think they believe in a future for their country. When I ask them, how many of you are thinking of migrating? Believe me, I've done this on 2 different occasions, 10 students different students on each occasion. 9 out of 10 think of migration as the opportunity to make their lives better. That's a reflection of students not just students, of young people who do not believe that the country can offer a better future for them, and the only way to make their lives better is to move away from this reality. I think that if you do not believe in that future, there's no way that you're going to engage with that present, or you're going to hope to change that present and become an activist. So I think this is perhaps one of our responsibilities. If we think of Rodney, it's also, and we think of the work that we have also done and that we continue to do, is to try to inspire the young people here, not just the students, but the youth in general, to believe that there can be a future in this country, and that future is one in which they will have to be drivers for change. Thank you, and now I'm going to pass on the mic to Suzanne.
Thank you, Enrique. A few years ago, I would say it was probably about 4 years ago, over at the UWI Museum, we started thinking about some of the missing pieces. And one of the missing pieces in the story of the university, as we tell it in the museum, related to Walter Rodney and to the period of the 1960s and so on. And I remember there was a meeting that came together. Rupert was one of the persons who was there. He kind of has been in and out of the conversation. But one of the great things was that Matthew, who was then the head of the Social History Project over at the university, what was then called the Social History Project of the History Department, was not only willing but enthusiastic about joining this conversation with us at the museum. The museum is a very small one, as some of you will realize, but I think the possibilities are large. Out of all of that has come all of this. And so I'm very, very happy, in a sense, to bring you Matthew's words. They should have come at the beginning. Unfortunately, my computer crashed, and I didn't get them until the day after the launch. So I'm going to kind of skate through. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'm going to read a good portion of what he had to say, which was directed at all of you and at those who aren't here. So, as you know, he's on fellowship leave for a year. So he starts, I greatly regret that unavoidable circumstances conspired to keep me from being with you in person to share in this auspicious occasion of collective remembering. This week, we remember together the events of 50 years ago when students on this campus opened the door to social change in this country and our region, sparked as they were by global fires started by their peers and a broader call from youth in this country for justice, equality, and human rights. For those of us who came of age after 1968, our world has been shaped by the changes brought about by that generation. I hope we can all learn from them. For those of the generation of 1968, this is an opportunity to reflect, with no doubt a mix of emotions, at an era of intense public action and personal discovery. It is our hope that Confrontations will facilitate these two goals of learning and reflection, and also inspire us to measure how far we have progressed since 1968. He talks a bit about the project and the exhibition and the relationship that we've developed over the past few years in terms of a kind of conversation and coming to this exhibition that's going on over at the museum and the conference. He notes, and I'm not reading all of this because some of it sort of speaks to me and it's kind of weird, but he talks about the fact that in addition to the Confrontations events, in a sense, they come in the context of a series we had developed about in 2015 called UWI and the 1960s, of which in a sense this is a part. And that started with our commemoration of the visit and speech at the university by Martin Luther King. And I look at that, and it's generally been a kind of occasional series. So we've looked at Martin Luther King's visit, Haile Selassie's visit, and so on. So he says, our efforts to get to this point were guided by a true spirit of collegiality and collaboration. I'm going to skip the next few words. And then he wants to give some thanks. And I think it is appropriate that we give thanks at the end as at the beginning. One of the things he wanted to say was a very special welcome and, at this point, thanks to the conference delegates, not only those from here, but those who have come from overseas and who have shared so significantly in the conference. And he had expressed delight at having you all here, and I'm sure that at the end, even more so than the beginning, that would be the case. He said he's grateful to the Office of the Vice Chancellor and the Vice Chancellor himself, Sir Hilary Beckles, for steadfast support of the project. Thanks also to the Office of the Principal, UWI Mona, especially Principal Dale Weber, and former Principal Archibald MacDonald. Special thanks to Mark Figueroa, Research Fellow at the UWI Archives, who has taken on the collecting of memories of 1968 as a personal mission. His enthusiasm, generosity, and facilitation of interviews and insights have expanded our initial vision of the project in several ways. At the very first stage of the planning, Rupert Lewis was there. He has remained a guiding interlocutor through every curve in the journey, sharing with us his memories and so much more. Of course, there are some bits he won't share with us, but never mind. His careful feedback, analysis, and deep insight have elevated the quality of our work, and we're very grateful. We're similarly thankful to Mervyn Morris for his quiet and unstinting sharing, and also to Brian Meeks, who accepted our invitation to open the exhibition. He expresses thanks to Acting Head of the History Department, Dr. Enrique Okenve, and to the staff of the Department of History and Archaeology, and we are all named. I won't name them. So he says, particularly Mrs. Camilla Clark Brown, Mrs. Claudine Walker Robinson, and Mrs. Rudy Ann Dennis Copeland have been expert as usual in helping with the organization of the conference activities. The conference co-chairs, Dr. Carl Watts and Dr. Renee Nelson, deserve special praise, especially as they came on board midway through the planning stages and brought a great deal of foresight to the project. He thanks the talented graphic artist, Miss Whitney Eaton, for her work on the visuals, and for above and beyond duties, thanks to Mr. Kwasi Tingling, who worked on the editing of the film Disturbance 1968, which many of you saw yesterday and which is on at the UWI Museum and will be on as long as the exhibition runs. So if any of you missed it, feel free to come over. Feel free to come over anyway. Matthew expresses, and I join him wholeheartedly in being grateful to the team of students who have worked closely in particular with the department since the launch of the UWI Under 60s project. The members of the History and Archaeology Society have always been ready to offer assistance, and he asked to single out a few students for their particular input. Ms. Samantha Campbell, a graduate student in Heritage Studies in the department. Sam, are you in here? No? Samantha is now my assistant, hopefully on a long-term basis at the museum. Matthew notes that she has been an immeasurable asset in the last stretch. She worked first of all on the project as a practicum assignment because she's a master's in heritage studies student, but her enthusiasm and good cheer has been very beneficial. Matthew asked to express special thanks to Mia McMorris, who similarly provided research support for the project whenever called upon to do so, and to Joanna Shuker, who also worked on the project as a researcher. Heartfelt thanks to all the persons we interviewed throughout the project research. We would not be able to understand the human details of what happened in 1968 if it were not for your willingness to share with us your memories of 1968. We have tried to do these memories justice in what we have on display in the exhibition. And I think that, I hope that even those who perhaps have not felt as represented in general for one reason or another will find when they come to the exhibition that they are recognized and that there is still plenty of scope for more. And I quote Matthew, I end with a point of observation. The majority of persons involved in this project, he and I included, are like Walter Rodney, graduates of this University of the West Indies, which celebrates its 70th anniversary this year. We are also, like Rodney, in the main, graduates of the Department of History and Archaeology. The mission of the department was from its beginnings in 1948 to make Caribbean people aware of their history. This is part of the mission that inspired Rodney to come here from Guyana as an undergraduate in 1960 and to return as a lecturer in 1968. 50 years after Rodney's banning, Confrontations is proof that, notwithstanding current trends, we still take that mission seriously. Walter Rodney was not just a student in the discipline of history, he was a disciplined historian. His example has served as an invisible hand leading us through this work. We invoke Rodney in the title of our project. It is a reflection on the events of 1968. In a reflection on the events of 1968, he wrote, "In Jamaica, the confrontations were clear. It is a lucid assessment of the time, but it is also a word that was then quite inflammatory. Politicians in 1960s Jamaica were raked over the coals anytime they used that word in public discourse. Rodney's choice of the word was very purposeful and indicative of his insistence on speaking truth to power. I thank Walter Rodney for his example. His legacy is with us. I hope that he would be happy with what we have done with it." Thank you very much.